"You're a terrible daughter-in-law," my mother-in-law screamed, her voice trembling with anger as she yanked my hair. I stumbled back, tears welling up, and whispered, "I didn't do anything." The room fell silent except for her harsh breaths. My husband and sister-in-law watched coldly, their eyes avoiding mine. In that moment, I realized that everything I held dear was slipping away. My heart raced, unsure of what would happen next. My name is Willow. I'm 40 years old. The other day, I put a pocket tissue in my pocket and carried it around, which is unusual for me. As a result, I accidentally washed it with my clothes. Thanks to that, my black pants look like clouds. No, it's not that beautiful. I'm getting older and a little more clumsy, but my clumsiness is cute. In the world, there are always people who are better than us. When I was in my 20s, my newlywed husband, Lucas, suddenly spoke up. "Are you ready to live together?" Huh? Who is going to live with whom? I was genuinely puzzled, even after thinking about it for a while. Lucas looked at me as I remained silent, and he explained, "It's about living with my parents." I was stunned. "Did we talk about that?" "No, but," he replied. There was no way he could know about a conversation that never happened. Lucas continued, ignoring my confusion. "My sister is taking care of my mother at home right now, but she'll get married eventually. My father has passed away, and I'm the eldest son. So we can't avoid living together in the future. It would be better for us to live together sooner rather than later." It was true that I hadn't been promised we wouldn't live together when we got married. But did that mean he could bring up something so important, like it was nothing? When it came time to renew the lease on our apartment, we decided instead to move into Lucas's family home. It wasn't the nicest place by any means, an old house where we ended up living with his bedridden mother and his sister, Remy. Around 2 weeks later, I was assigned to make lunch without realizing it. "Oh, risotto for lunch today?" my mother-in-law asked. "Yes, I thought it would be easy to eat," I replied. "I hate risotto. Throw it away." She snorted and turned away. She said she hated risotto, but hadn't she eaten it when my sister-in-law made it the other day? Then I was asked to help move the wheelchair, and was told that I was rough, or that she was scared, because it was shaking. I don't remember moving it violently. My sister-in-law suddenly started a part-time job after we began living together. She likely planned from the start for me to care for her mother as a way to return to normal life. Before we got married, Lucas told me, "We should retire from work because we have to prepare for marriage and want children in the future." Now I regret quitting my previous job. In short, I was deceived by this family from the beginning. They probably intended to make me a housewife and take care of their parents. Now I'm exhausted all day long by my mother-in-law's demands, more tired than when I was working. There is no room for having children like this. When I thought about consulting Lucas about my relationship with my mother-in-law, he took the initiative, saying, "Hey Willow, can't you be a little kinder to my mother?" "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "It's not like I'm being cold. My mother feels like you hate her. She's scared when you glare at her. After all, a mother-in-law is probably a nuisance to a new bride," he concluded. "I don't mean that at all," I replied. "I want to get along with her." He looked thoughtful, but unconvinced. But my mother says she's scared of you. Maybe you're just not compromising enough, no matter how you feel," he continued, a hint of doubt in his voice. I didn't mean to stare at her when she said things like the food didn't taste good, or she hated the menu during lunchtime. But honestly, I was feeling down too. Maybe that showed on my face. "Maybe it's your fault then," he added firmly. "Don't make dishes that my mother hates." I asked in advance about what foods she doesn't like, and when Remy made it before, she ate it properly, I protested. "Maybe your seasoning is bad," he said dismissively. "When I made it, your mother told me to throw away the dishes without even taking a bite, but when Remy made it before, she ate from them without a word. It's not just a seasoning problem," I explained. "Don't get angry," Lucas uttered, clearly annoyed. "If my mother dislikes it, that's the final word. You need to reflect on yourself. That's the end of this conversation. Just try to get along with her." With that, he went to take a shower. Thinking over his words, it felt like I was the only one at fault. I was tired of it all, so for the first time that day, I went back to the bedroom before Lucas. I didn't want to see his face more than necessary. I tried my best. Since we were living together, I thought I'd try harder to compromise with my mother-in-law and not think of her words and actions as bullying. However, her words and actions gradually worsened. She would deliberately spill food and say things like, "Hurry up and wipe it off, you're slow," or "It's too bad to swallow." She even blew something she had in her mouth onto my face. After reading books on caregiving, I learned that people with dementia are more likely to exhibit aggressive behavior, but my mother-in-law was only weak in her legs and waist. Honestly, I don't think there's a need for so much caregiving. Of course, I have no experience or knowledge in this area. My understanding is shallow, built from what I learned after coming to this house. That's why I initially followed what my husband and sister-in-law told me. But once I suggested to them that it's not that we should do everything, but it would be better if we supported our mother to do something herself so that she wouldn't get weaker. Because caregiving books also describe that excessive caregiving leads to a decline in physical function and disuse syndrome. For example, if you repeatedly move around in a wheelchair when you can walk a little bit, your leg and waist muscles will weaken, and you will not be able to move on your own. I suggested it in good faith, because I don't think my mother-in-law wants such a thing either. But my sister-in-law said angrily, "No way! She's getting weaker day by day." It seems that she suddenly became weak around the time we started living together. What nonsense. But there was no one on my side. She used to eat meals by herself before, but now she needs care, so understand her more, Lucas demanded, adding to my sister-in-law's words. That's how he ended up scolding me too. In short, my mother-in-law's bullying continued. One morning as I was changing my mother-in-law's diaper, she complained, "It hurts." She accused me of pulling her leg too hard, then scratched my face in response. I could feel my forehead and eyelids start to sting, knowing they were injured. To make it worse, she threw her dirty diaper at me. I knew right away her complaint was just a false accusation. It doesn't hurt to simply remove the tape from a diaper. You really lack any charm as a daughter-in-law. You should leave this house soon. Lucas deserved a better wife than you, she finally shouted. In that moment, I finally understood the root of her hatred toward me. She just didn't want her son to get married. Looking back, my mother-in-law was happy when she saw my husband in a tuxedo at the wedding and said, "You look like your father." She may be superimposing her deceased husband on her son. Losing such an important part of her life wasn't worth lashing out and throwing things over. "I didn't pull your leg, Mother. I didn't even touch your leg. If you don't like me, you can ask Remy to take care of you instead," I retorted. When I said that, my mother-in-law shouted, "Oh no, you're blaming the elderly like that. You're just a stranger. You're not kind to me at all. You're a terrible daughter-in-law." "Didn't you scratch me first, mother-in-law?" I defended myself indignantly. My mother-in-law glared at me. If it were my usual self, I would have been a little scared of this look. But this time, no matter how I thought about it, my mother-in-law was wrong. Softening my tone, I continued, "I appreciate your words, but it's impossible for your body to hurt just by removing the tape from the diaper. I've been paying close attention so that it doesn't hurt because you said the same thing before. If it really hurts, maybe there's something wrong with your nerves. I think you should go to the hospital," I concluded. "What did you say?" "You're a terrible daughter-in-law," my mother-in-law shouted and pulled my hair, shaking it back and forth with strength that I couldn't believe came from someone bedridden. My forehead hit the edge of the bed many times. "It hurts! It hurts, Mother!" I shouted as my mother-in-law kept pulling my hair, shaking my head back and forth. It probably lasted only 5 minutes given her strength, but it felt like 15. My head throbbed, and when she finally let go, my vision was flickering. "Now, if you've learned your lesson, change my diaper," she demanded. Who would comply with that? I walked away, leaving her. As expected, she made a mess, and the house filled with an awful smell. Reluctantly, I cleaned up, watching her smirk with satisfaction. I thought to myself, fine, if that's how she wants it. I'd heard stories of staff members snapping in care facilities, and I could finally understand that feeling. My mother-in-law resented that her son had married, so naturally, she disliked me. I had held on to the hope that things would eventually settle down, but I realized now that was naive. Tonight, I'd tell my husband about all that had happened, and ask to end this cohabitation. If he refused, maybe meeting his mother's wishes would be the answer. Maybe both she and I would be happier apart. But before I could speak to him, my mother-in-law called a family meeting with my husband, his sister, and me in the living room. I had a sinking feeling. "What's going on? Can't you just eat first?" my husband asked, taking his mother's hand. "What happened? Tell me anything." That daughter-in-law, my mother-in-law began, noticeably nervous. She refused to use my name, and I could feel the coldness in my husband and sister-in-law's stares. She pretends to be my caregiver, but hits me while I'm bedridden. Even when I tell her it hurts, she blames it on caregiving. She has no respect as a daughter-in-law, she accused angrily. I was speechless. Dragging me by the hair to the point where I nearly lost consciousness from the pain, she was now claiming to be the victim. "This daughter-in-law is terrifying. I can't bear her anymore." My mother-in-law continued to insult me. "No, that's not true," I replied, showing the scratch on my forehead. "She did this to me." "She scratched herself," my mother-in-law retorted, voice rising. "She wants me gone so she can take over. Please, Lucas, Remy, do you believe me?" My husband and sister-in-law were silent, but their expressions were enough. Glaring at me, my husband finally spat. "I can't believe you would treat Mom like that. This marriage was a mistake." "Exactly, brother. Why did you marry someone like her? Poor Mom," my sister-in-law added, her voice filled with contempt. I felt my love for him freeze over. Here we were, newlyweds, and yet I knew what I needed to say. "Fine, I'll agree to a divorce and return you to your beloved mother," I said, looking directly at him. His face changed, almost as if he disliked being the one left behind. "Calm down," he replied, trying to regain control. But I had already decided. I grabbed my phone and bag, which already held my wallet and bank book, ready to leave. I'd get my things later. Leaving couldn't happen fast enough. Emotionally, I walked out with the urgency of someone escaping at the speed of light. After leaving my in-laws' house and walking a little, I thought I would live with my parents for a while, and took out my cell phone to call them. At that moment, I heard my husband's distant shout, "Oh no!" When I turned around, smoke and fire were billowing out of my in-laws' house. The area around my mother-in-law's room was particularly bad. Oh well, I thought. It was no longer my problem, so I didn't care what happened to that house. But the situation was like a comedy, and I couldn't help but grin. My husband, sister-in-law, and mother-in-law rushed out of the house in a panic. When they saw me, my husband shouted, "Help me!" Although I would normally ignore them, I approached because it seemed a little interesting. My husband begged, "Call the fire department. I forgot to bring my cell phone." "Why don't you go to the fire station and report it, mother-in-law?" I suggested, looking at her. "Don't say stupid things at a time like this," my husband snapped. "Well, I don't think it's impossible," I replied nonchalantly. "Look," I said, pointing my finger. My husband and sister-in-law looked at the same place at the same time. "Huh, mother? Why?" They stared in shock. My mother-in-law, who was supposed to be bedridden due to weak legs and hips, was standing with her shoulders heaving and breathing heavily. After her face briefly froze, she exclaimed, "Ah!" Her face turned pale. "Mother-in-law, you can stand without a wheelchair or assistance now," I said. "Did a miracle happen?" I continued with a smile. "You ran so well. Why don't you try participating in the senior division of a track and field competition?" In contrast to me, who was smiling, my family was speechless. It was awful that my husband and his sister rushed out of the house without even thinking about their mother, who was important to them. But if they were told that their bedridden mother had run away energetically, any guilt would disappear. It seemed that they had forgotten to call the fire department in their haste, but it looked like the neighbor who had come out in a hurry had already contacted them. "What do you think the cause is?" I asked my family-in-law. My husband looked bewildered. "Why is that?" "Yes, the black smoke is coming from my bedridden mother-in-law's room, not the kitchen or anywhere else. There shouldn't be anything that would normally catch fire," I replied. "It's probably my mother-in-law's cigarette." "What?" my husband muttered, aghast. "She should have quit smoking since she became bedridden," I continued. Upon hearing my words, my family-in-law immediately looked at my mother-in-law. "Hey, mother," I said, a smirk on my face. Actually, you can walk, can't you? Well, today was the first time I saw you walking. You know, when Remy goes to the convenience store to buy cigarettes, she buys a carton of them, and I thought they were running out too fast. So, while cleaning up, I regularly checked Remy's shelf in her room and found that the cigarette box was decreasing, even though Remy wasn't using them. That means that when my mother-in-law and I were alone in the house during the day, I noticed something unusual. The cigarette box, which had 7 cigarettes before I left, had only 6 left, and there was a faint cigarette smell coming from my mother-in-law. She must have been stealing cigarettes when no one was around, probably long before we arrived, I concluded. My mother-in-law lowered her head when she heard this. Also, mother-in-law hated the smell of diapers and wanted to put strong air fresheners in the room. She was also concerned about bad breath due to aging and used mouth spray frequently. She also preferred hand creams with strong fragrances, I added. Upon hearing this, my husband and sister-in-law shouted in unison, "Quit smoking!" They seemed to have given up, and my mother-in-law apologized while crying. While my family-in-law was amazed by my mother-in-law's behavior, I asked my husband, "Was her leg injury caused by a fracture? Weren't you worried?" "Yeah," he muttered. "Doctor said she could walk again after it healed, but her leg suddenly got worse and worse. I thought she was getting old, so I increased my visits home." So she got a taste of it. "Your mother loves you," I said sarcastically. "If you hadn't taken her word for it and taken her to the hospital, she wouldn't have pretended to be bedridden." My mother-in-law neither denied nor affirmed my words, and began to tremble. Seeing this, my husband and sister-in-law shouted, "You tricked us!" While firefighters scrambled to put out the flames, my in-laws kept arguing, oblivious to the danger to the house and everyone around. Although the house was only partially burned, the family bond was completely destroyed. In the end, my mother-in-law was abandoned with a simple, "Do whatever you want." Later, my husband realized the truth and apologized, saying, "I want to start over." But I refused, saying, "I'm still angry that you never listened to me and blamed me for everything. I don't want to go back." After that, my husband and I divorced. My mother-in-law lost her home, and my husband was forced into a nursing home by his family with the words, "Here's a place for your final days." None of my mother-in-law's children visited her, leaving her completely isolated from them. Other residents often had family come to visit, and this must have been painful for my mother-in-law, who loved her son deeply. The fire was ultimately traced back to a cigarette. That day my mother-in-law was smoking in bed, and startled by my husband's sudden arrival, tried to hide it. In her rush, she tossed the cigarette into a corner without fully putting it out. It smoldered for a while before igniting a nearby curtain, and soon the flames spread to the walls and beyond, eventually reaching the neighbor's house. She was later charged with arson and fined, but with no means to pay. On top of that, the neighbors filed a lawsuit for damages. My husband and sister-in-law had to bear the costs, losing their belongings and any chance of their own home. My husband moved to a cheap apartment, and my sister-in-law took a dorm room provided by her job. Not long after, my husband's new apartment was marked as a crime scene when an unidentified body was found there. My sister-in-law, too, faced trouble. She had been stalked by a man in his 40s, who followed her to her new job. He'd fallen in love with her and pursued her for years, even after she changed workplaces. While no one wished unhappiness on anyone, it seemed like misery followed all of them. Eventually, my ex-husband and sister-in-law came to me, asking for help and even for money. But I told them, "We're divorced now, we're strangers. I can't help you." After the divorce, I decided to change jobs. I'd been an office worker before, but struggled to find another similar position, so I switched to sales. Despite my lack of experience, I put in the effort, and was eventually promoted to department manager. I was praised for excelling, despite my late start, surpassing peers my age who had been there from the beginning. Maybe it's because I learned how to handle difficult people in marriage. I sometimes even enjoy dealing with those everyone else finds tough. Perhaps I've become braver. As for marriage, I'm done with it. Instead, I've met wonderful people through work. On Friday nights we go out, and on weekends we have fun together. I'm probably enjoying life more now than in my youth. Many lament being single, but it suits me perfectly. At this point, I might just become the happiest single person in the world. Well, maybe not single. I'm surrounded by people. Either way, as long as it's fun, that's all that matters.